Sarah Martinez walked quickly down the busy street, her purse clutched tightly against her chest. The evening rush hour had started, and people pushed past her in their hurry to get home. She had just finished her shift at the local bookstore and was heading to catch the bus when something made her stop. Near the corner of 5th and Main Street, she saw a small figure huddled against the brick wall of an old building. It was a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing clothes that looked too big for his thin frame. His dark hair was messy, and dirt streaked his pale cheeks. What broke Sarah's heart was the way he sat there, so still and quiet, while hundreds of people walked past him without a second glance. Sarah had always been the type of person who noticed things others missed. Her mother used to say she had a heart too big for her own good. As she watched the boy, she saw him reach into a torn plastic bag and pull out what looked like a piece of stale bread. He stared at it for a long moment before taking a small bite, chewing slowly as if he wanted to make it last. The sight made Sarah's stomach twist with concern. She looked around at all the restaurants lining the street. The smell of fresh pizza, grilled burgers, and fried chicken filled the air. People walked by carrying bags of takeout food, while this little boy sat hungry just a few feet away from all this abundance. Without thinking twice, Sarah crossed the street toward the boy. As she got closer, she could see that his shoes had holes in them, and his jacket was way too thin for the cool October evening. When she knelt down beside him, he looked up at her with the biggest, most beautiful brown eyes she had ever seen. There was fear in those eyes, but also something else, a quiet dignity that seemed far too mature for someone so young. "Hi there," Sarah said softly, not wanting to frighten him. "I'm Sarah. What's your name?" The boy didn't answer right away. He clutched his plastic bag closer to his chest and seemed ready to run if she made any sudden moves. Sarah could tell he had learned to be careful around strangers, and her heart ached thinking about what experiences had taught him that lesson. "I was wondering if you might be hungry," she continued, keeping her voice gentle and calm. "There's a really nice restaurant right across the street, and I was thinking about getting some dinner. Would you like to join me?" The boy's eyes widened with surprise. He glanced toward the restaurant she had pointed to, a warm, inviting place, called Romano's Italian Kitchen. Through the large windows, they could see families sitting around tables, sharing meals and laughing together. The boy looked back at Sarah, confusion written all over his face. You want to buy me food?" he asked in a small, hoarse voice that suggested he hadn't spoken to anyone in quite some time. "I'd love to," Sarah replied with a warm smile. "Everyone deserves a good meal, especially on a chilly evening like this." The boy hesitated for what felt like several minutes, studying Sarah's face as if trying to determine whether he could trust her. Finally, he gave a tiny nod and began to gather his few belongings: the plastic bag, an old blanket, and a small stuffed dog that had seen better days. As they walked across the street together, Sarah noticed how the boy stayed close to her side, but was ready to bolt if necessary. She wondered how long he had been living on the streets and where his family might be. More importantly, she wondered how she could help him beyond just buying him one meal. When they reached Romano's, the warm air and delicious aromas seemed to wrap around them like a hug. The hostess, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked, surprised to see them together, but smiled warmly and led them to a quiet table near the back of the restaurant. Sarah watched as the boy's eyes grew wide, taking in everything around him. The checkered tablecloths, the soft lighting, the families enjoying their meals. It was clear he hadn't been in a place like this in a very long time, if ever. When the waitress brought them menus, he stared at the pictures of food with an expression of amazement and longing. "You can order anything you want," Sarah told him gently. "Anything at all." For the first time since she had met him, the boy smiled. A small, shy smile that transformed his entire face and made Sarah's heart skip a beat. She had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to change both of their lives in ways she could never have imagined. The boy stared at the menu for a long time, his finger tracing over the pictures of pasta dishes and pizza. Sarah could see him trying to read the words, his lips moving silently as he worked through each item. When the waitress came back, he looked up at Sarah with uncertain eyes. "I don't know what to pick," he whispered. "Everything looks so good." "How about we start with some warm soup?" Sarah suggested. "And maybe some garlic bread? Then we can see what else sounds tasty." The boy nodded eagerly, and Sarah placed their order. As they waited for the food, she tried to learn more about him without pushing too hard. She discovered his name was Michael, and he had been on his own for several weeks. He wouldn't say much about how he ended up on the streets, but Sarah could see the pain in his eyes whenever she asked about his family. "Do you go to school, Michael?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not anymore. I used to, but—" He trailed off and looked down at his hands, which were folded carefully in his lap. When their food arrived, Sarah had to fight back tears as she watched Michael eat. He was clearly starving, but he ate slowly and carefully, as if he was trying to make each bite last forever. Between spoonfuls of the rich tomato soup, he kept looking at Sarah as if he couldn't believe this was really happening. "This is the best food I've ever tasted," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Thank you, Miss Sarah. Thank you so much." The gratitude in his voice made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. How could such a young child be so alone in the world? She found herself thinking about her own comfortable apartment, her warm bed, her full refrigerator. Meanwhile, this sweet boy had been sleeping on cold concrete and going hungry. As Michael finished his soup and moved on to a plate of spaghetti and meatballs, other people in the restaurant began to notice them. Sarah saw some customers glancing over with curious expressions, and she could almost hear them wondering about the story behind the well-dressed woman and the obviously homeless child. The owner of the restaurant, an older Italian man with salt and pepper hair, emerged from the kitchen and began making his rounds to different tables, greeting regular customers and checking on everyone's meals. When he approached their table, Sarah braced herself, worried. He might ask them to leave. Instead, the man looked at Michael with an expression Sarah couldn't quite read. There was something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe? Or recognition. He stood there for a moment, just staring at the boy, who was too focused on his food to notice the attention. "Is everything all right with your meal?" the owner asked, his voice slightly hoarse. "Oh, yes, everything is wonderful," Sarah replied quickly. "The food is delicious and the service has been excellent." But the man wasn't looking at her. His eyes remained fixed on Michael, who had finally noticed the stranger standing beside their table. When the boy looked up, sauce still on his chin, from the spaghetti, the restaurant owner's face went completely pale. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But what is your name, young man?" Michael looked nervously at Sarah, then back at the man. "Michael," he said quietly. "Michael what?" the owner pressed, taking a step closer to the table. His hands were shaking now, and Sarah could see that something significant was happening, though she had no idea what. "Michael Romano," the boy replied, and the restaurant owner stumbled backward as if he'd been struck by lightning. The man's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down his cheeks. Other customers started turning to look, sensing the drama unfolding in their midst. Sarah felt completely lost, looking back and forth between the crying man and the confused little boy. "Papa?" Michael whispered, his fork dropping from his hand with a clatter. "Papa, is that really you?" The restaurant owner, who Sarah now realized must be Michael's father, fell to his knees beside the table and reached out with trembling hands to touch his son's face. "Michael, my boy, my precious boy, we've been looking for you everywhere. Where have you been? What happened to you?" The entire restaurant had fallen silent now, All conversations stopped as people watched this incredible reunion unfold. Sarah felt her own eyes filling with tears as she witnessed the raw emotion between father and son. Michael threw his arms around his father's neck, and both of them sobbed as they held each other tight. "I got lost, Papa," Michael cried. "I got so lost, and I couldn't find my way back. I've been trying to come home for so long." Through her own tears, Sarah began to understand what she had stumbled into. This wasn't just any homeless child she had helped. This was the missing son of the very restaurant where she had brought him for a meal. The coincidence seemed too incredible to be real, but here it was happening right in front of her eyes. The reunion between Michael and his father was so emotional that Sarah could barely process what she was witnessing. Giuseppe Romano held his son like he would never let him go again, tears streaming down both of their faces. The other diners in the restaurant watched in stunned silence, many wiping away their own tears as they realized they were seeing something extraordinary. "Maria! Maria! Come quickly!" Giuseppe called toward the kitchen, his voice breaking with emotion. "Our Michael is here! Our boy has come home!" A woman with graying hair and flour-dusted hands burst through the kitchen doors, stopping dead in her tracks when she saw the scene at the table. She stared for a moment, as if unable to believe her eyes, then let out a cry that came from somewhere deep in her soul. "My baby!" Maria Romano rushed to the table and joined the embrace, sandwiching Michael between his parents as all three of them sobbed together. "My precious baby boy, you're alive! You're really alive!" Sarah sat quietly, not wanting to intrude on this private family moment, but unable to leave without knowing the whole story. Other customers began whispering among themselves, and she heard fragments of conversation that helped her understand the situation better. "That's their son, Michael," an elderly man at a nearby table whispered to his wife. "He disappeared about 2 months ago during that terrible storm. They've had search parties out looking for him every weekend since then." "The poor family," his wife replied, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. "Giuseppe had to close the restaurant for 2 weeks because he was so distraught. They put up missing posters all over town." As the initial shock began to wear off, Giuseppe pulled back to look at his son properly. His joy quickly turned to concern as he took in Michael's appearance. The too thin frame, the dirty clothes, the exhaustion in those young eyes. "Michael, what happened to you?" Giuseppe asked gently, smoothing his son's messy hair. "Where have you been all this time? We looked everywhere for you." Michael's lower lip trembled as he tried to find the words. "I went to the park that day, remember? When the big storm started, I tried to run home, but the wind was so strong. A tree branch fell and blocked the path, and I got confused about which way to go. I kept walking and walking, but everything looked different." Maria cupped her son's face in her hands, studying every detail as if memorizing him all over again. "We searched that park 100 times, sweetheart. How did we miss you?" "I found an old shed in the woods behind the park," Michael explained. "I stayed there during the worst of the storm, but when I tried to find my way out, I just got more lost. I ended up in a different part of town, and I didn't know how to get back. I tried asking people for help, but—" He trailed off, and Sarah could see the fear and pain in his expression. She imagined this young child approaching strangers for help, only to be turned away or ignored. The thought made her heart ache. Giuseppe turned his attention to Sarah for the first time since recognizing his son. "Miss, I'm sorry. I haven't even thanked you. You brought our boy home to us. How can we ever repay you?" Sarah shook her head, feeling overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. "I didn't know," she said softly. "I just saw a hungry child and wanted to help. I had no idea he was your son." "But you chose to help him," Maria said, reaching across the table to clasp Sarah's hands. "So many people must have walked past him, but you stopped. You saw our Michael when others didn't." The truth of those words hit Sarah hard. She thought about all the people who had hurried past Michael on the street, including herself initially. What if she hadn't turned back? What if she had just kept walking to catch her bus? Michael might have spent another night, cold and hungry, on the streets, and his family might have gone on suffering, not knowing if their child was alive or dead. Giuseppe stood up and called out to his staff, who had all gathered near the kitchen door to watch the reunion. "Everyone listen to me. This is my son Michael. He's been missing for 2 months, and tonight this angel brought him home to us." The entire restaurant erupted in applause and cheers. Customers stood up from their tables, wiping away tears and clapping for the incredible turn of events they had just witnessed. Several people came over to congratulate the family and to shake Sarah's hand, thanking her for her kindness. "You're a hero," one woman told Sarah. "What you did tonight was beautiful." But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who had simply done what anyone should do when they see a child in need. The fact that it had led to this miraculous reunion seemed like something beyond her control, like destiny had played a hand in bringing this family back together. As the excitement in the restaurant began to settle down, Giuseppe returned his full attention to Michael. "Son, you must be exhausted. Let's get you home and into a warm bath. Your room is exactly as you left it. We didn't change a single thing." Michael nodded, but he looked over at Sarah with concern. "Will Miss Sarah come with us? She's been so nice to me." Sarah started to protest, not wanting to impose on this family reunion, but both Giuseppe and Maria immediately insisted that she join them. "Please," Maria said, "you've given us back our most precious gift. The least we can do is properly thank you and make sure you get home safely." As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at how quickly her ordinary evening had transformed into something extraordinary. She had simply followed her instincts to help a child in need, and now she was part of a story that seemed almost too incredible to be true. The Romano family lived in a cozy apartment above their restaurant, which explained why Giuseppe had been in the building when Sarah brought Michael in for dinner. As they climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, Sarah could see family, photos lining the walls, pictures of Michael at various ages, family gatherings, and moments of happiness that had been frozen in time before tragedy struck. Maria immediately began fussing over her son, drawing a warm bath and laying out clean clothes. "You're nothing but skin and bones," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "How did you survive out there for so long?" Michael sat on his old bed, which was exactly as Giuseppe had promised, unchanged from the day he disappeared. His toys were still arranged on the shelves, his books stacked neatly on the desk, and his favorite stuffed animals lined up against the pillows. It was like a shrine to a lost child, preserved in hope of his return. "Sometimes people would give me food," Michael explained quietly. "There was a lady at the bus station who would share her sandwich with me sometimes, and I learned which restaurants threw away food that was still good, but mostly I was just hungry." The casual way he described his survival broke Sarah's heart. This innocent child had been forced to learn skills no 8-year-old should ever need to know. He spoke about digging through garbage for food as if it were just another part of daily life, and his matter-of-fact tone made it even more heartbreaking. Giuseppe sat down heavily in a chair, his face showing the strain of 2 months of worry and sleepless nights. "We never gave up looking for you," he told his son. "Every single day, your mama and I would close the restaurant early and go searching in different neighborhoods. We put up posters, talked to the police, contacted every shelter in the city." "The hardest part was not knowing," Maria added, sitting beside Michael and stroking his hair. "Not knowing if you were safe, if you were warm, if you had enough to eat. Every night I would lie awake thinking about you somewhere out there, scared and alone." Sarah watched this family reconnecting and felt like she was intruding on something deeply private. She stood up to leave, but Giuseppe immediately gestured for her to sit back down. "Please don't go yet," he said. "I want to understand exactly how you found Michael. This feels like more than just coincidence." As Sarah told the story of seeing Michael on the street and deciding to offer him a meal, Giuseppe and Maria exchanged meaningful looks. There was something in their expressions that suggested this moment meant more to them than just getting their son back. "You see," Giuseppe said finally, "my family has owned this restaurant for 3 generations. My grandfather started it, then my father ran it, and now it's mine. We've always believed in the importance of feeding people, of bringing families together over good food. But in the past few months since Michael disappeared, I began to question everything." He paused, looking around the apartment that had felt so empty without his son's laughter filling it. "I started to wonder if any of it mattered. What good was feeding other families when I couldn't even keep my own family safe? I was thinking about selling the restaurant, maybe moving away from all the memories." Maria nodded, tears starting fresh in her eyes. "We were losing our faith in people, in kindness, in the idea that good things happen to good people. Losing Michael made us feel like the world was a cruel, uncaring place. But then you came along," Giuseppe continued, looking directly at Sarah. "A complete stranger who saw our son and chose to help him, without expecting anything in return. You didn't just feed him, you brought him to exactly the right place at exactly the right time. How do we explain something like that?" Sarah felt uncomfortable with the weight of their gratitude. "I really didn't do anything special," she insisted. "Anyone would have helped a hungry child." "But that's not true, is it?" Maria said gently. "Michael told us he'd been on those streets for weeks. How many people walked past him without stopping? How many people saw him and chose to look the other way?" The truth of that observation settled heavily in the room. Sarah thought about her own initial impulse to hurry past Michael to catch her bus. She had almost been one of those people who chose not to get involved, not to see what was right in front of her. Michael, who had been quietly listening to this conversation while eating a second dinner his mother had prepared for him, suddenly spoke up. "Miss Sarah didn't just buy me food," he said. "She talked to me like I was a real person. She asked my name and sat with me and made me feel like I mattered. Most people looked at me like I was invisible." His words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She realized that what had felt like a small act of kindness to her had meant everything to this lost child. In a world where he had been ignored and dismissed, she had simply treated him with basic human dignity. "I work at a bookstore," Sarah said quietly, not sure why she was sharing this detail. "I see people every day who are struggling, who are lonely, who just need someone to notice them. I guess I've learned that sometimes the smallest gesture can make the biggest difference in someone's life." Giuseppe stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the street where his son had been sitting just a few hours earlier. "Do you know what I think?" he said. "I think this was meant to happen exactly the way it did. Michael was meant to be on that corner. You were meant to walk by and see him, and you were meant to bring him to our restaurant. Everything lined up perfectly to bring our family back together." Sarah wanted to argue that it was just luck, just a random series of events, but she couldn't deny that the coincidences seemed almost impossible to explain away. Of all the restaurants in the city, she had chosen the one owned by Michael's parents. Of all the nights Michael could have been. On that particular corner, it was the night she happened to walk by and notice him. As the evening wore on, more details of Michael's disappearance and survival began to emerge. The family learned that he had actually been quite close to home several times during his weeks on the streets, but fear and confusion had prevented him from recognizing familiar landmarks. The trauma of being lost and alone had affected his ability to think clearly, and what should have been a simple journey home had become an impossible maze. "There was one day when I was sure I saw our restaurant," Michael told them, curled up between his parents on the couch. "But it was during the lunch rush, and there were so many people. I was scared they would think I was trying to steal food or cause trouble. I didn't look the way I used to look." Sarah could picture it clearly, this frightened, dirty child standing outside his own family's restaurant, too ashamed and scared to go inside, The image made her chest tight with emotion. How many times had help been within reach, but fear had kept him from grasping it? Maria held her son tighter, as if she could somehow protect him from the pain he had already endured. "You should never be afraid to come home," she whispered. "No matter what you look like, no matter what's happened, you always belong here with us." The conversation turned to more practical matters as the night progressed. Giuseppe called the police to report that Michael had been found safe, and they arranged for an officer to come take a statement the next morning. Maria called Michael's school to let them know he would be returning soon. There were doctor's appointments to schedule, paperwork to file, and 100 small details involved in bringing a missing child back into normal life. Through it all, Sarah sat quietly, marveling at how quickly this family was rebuilding their world around Michael's return. It was clear that despite the joy of having him back, there would be challenges ahead. Michael had been through a traumatic experience that would take time to process and heal from. The family would need to rebuild trust and address the fears that had kept them apart, even when they were geographically close. "Sarah," Giuseppe said suddenly, pulling her from her thoughts, "I want to ask you something, and I hope you'll consider it seriously." She looked up to find both parents watching her with earnest expressions. "Of course." "We want to offer you a job," Maria said. "We need someone to help us run the front of the restaurant, someone who understands people the way you do. You saw our son when others didn't. You have a gift for noticing who needs help." Sarah was taken aback by the unexpected offer. "That's incredibly generous, but I already have a job at the bookstore, and I don't have any restaurant experience." "We can teach you the restaurant business," Giuseppe said, "but we can't teach someone to have a heart like yours. This family has been given a second chance tonight, and we want you to be part of it." The offer was tempting, but Sarah felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened. A few hours ago, she had been a bookstore employee heading home after an ordinary day. Now, she was being invited to join a family that felt like they owed her a debt she didn't believe she had earned. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "This has all been so unexpected." "Of course," Maria said with a warm smile. "Take all the time you need, but know that you'll always have a place here with us, whether you work for us or not. You're part of our family now." As the evening wound down, Sarah prepared to leave. Michael, who was fighting sleep after his first full meal in weeks, insisted on walking her to the door. "Miss Sarah," he said quietly, tugging on her sleeve. "Will you come back and visit me?" "Of course I will," she promised, kneeling down to his level. "I want to hear all about how you're doing in school and what books you're reading." His face lit up at the mention of books. "I love to read, but I haven't been able to go to the library in a long time." "Well, I work at a bookstore," Sarah told him. "Maybe your parents will let me take you there sometime, and you can pick out some new books to read." The excitement in Michael's eyes reminded Sarah why she had stopped on the street in the first place. This wasn't about miraculous coincidences or destiny. It was about a child who deserved love, safety, and the chance to dream about his future again. Giuseppe walked Sarah downstairs and outside to wait for her taxi. The street where she had first seen Michael was now empty except for the usual evening traffic. It was hard to believe that just a few hours earlier, a desperate child had been sitting alone on that cold concrete. "I keep thinking about all the what-ifs," Giuseppe said, looking at the spot where his son had been. "What if you hadn't seen him? What if you had decided not to get involved? What if you had taken him to a different restaurant?" Sarah had been thinking the same things. "I guess we'll never know the answers to those questions. We can only be grateful for how things actually worked out." "No," Giuseppe said firmly. "We can be grateful, but we can also learn from this. You didn't find Michael by accident. You found him because you were paying attention. You were looking at the world around you instead of just rushing through it." His words resonated with Sarah in a way she hadn't expected. She realized that her decision to help Michael hadn't been a spontaneous act of kindness. It had been the result of a lifetime of choosing to notice people who were struggling, to see humanity in unexpected places. "Thank you for reminding me why that matters," she said softly. As her taxi pulled up, Giuseppe handed her a business card for the restaurant. "Promise me you'll think about our offer," he said. "Not because you owe us anything, but because the world needs more people like you in it." 3 months later, Sarah stood behind the host station at Romano's Italian kitchen, greeting customers with the same warm attention she had once given to browsing bookshoppers. She had ultimately decided to accept Giuseppe and Maria's offer, drawn by their vision of creating more than just a restaurant. They wanted to build a place where people truly took care of each other. The transition hadn't been without its challenges. Learning the restaurant business required mastering everything from reservation systems to wine pairings, and there were days when Sarah missed the quiet predictability of her bookstore job. But watching the Romano family heal and rebuild had been worth every difficult moment. Michael had flourished in the months since his return. With proper counseling and the security of being home, he had regained his confidence and returned to school. He spent his afternoons doing homework at a corner table in the restaurant, often looking up to wave at Sarah when she passed by. His laughter, which had been absent from the building for so long, now filled the dining room again and reminded everyone who worked there why family mattered so much. The story of Michael's rescue and reunion had spread throughout the community, bringing new customers who wanted to support the family and hear the incredible tale firsthand. But more importantly, it had inspired other acts of kindness. Sarah regularly saw customers paying for strangers' meals, offering help to people in need, and taking the time to really see the individuals around them. "It's like you started a chain reaction," Maria told Sarah one evening as they closed the restaurant together. "People come here not just for the food, but because they want to be part of something good." Sarah had noticed it too. The restaurant had become a gathering place for people who believed in looking out for each other. Regular customers checked on elderly neighbors, families shared tables with lone diners, and everyone seemed more aware of the human connections that made life meaningful. One evening, as Sarah was seating a young couple for their anniversary dinner, she spotted a familiar figure through the front window. An elderly man was shuffling slowly past the restaurant, stopping occasionally to rest against the building. His clothes were clean but worn, and something about his posture suggested he was carrying more than just physical fatigue. Without hesitation, Sarah asked one of the other staff members to cover the host station and stepped outside. "Excuse me, sir?" she said gently to the man, who looked up at her with tired but kind eyes. "I'm Sarah, and I work here at Romano's. I was wondering if you'd like to come in and have some dinner with us tonight." The man's eyes filled with tears, and Sarah could see that her simple offer had touched something deep inside him. "That's very kind of you, miss, but I couldn't afford—" "It would be our pleasure," Sarah interrupted softly. "Everyone deserves a good meal and some company." As she led the grateful man inside and settled him at a comfortable table, Sarah caught Giuseppe's eye across the restaurant. He smiled and nodded approvingly, then headed to the kitchen to personally prepare a special meal for their unexpected guest. Michael, who had been reading at his usual corner table, looked up and watched the interaction with understanding beyond his years. When Sarah walked past his table a few minutes later, he reached out to touch her arm. "You did it again," he said with a grin that reminded her of that first shy smile in the restaurant months ago. "Did what?" Sarah asked, though she already knew what he meant. "You saw someone who needed help, and you helped them, just like you helped me." Sarah ruffled his hair affectionately. "That's what people do for each other, Michael. We take care of each other." "I know," he said seriously. "And when I grow up, I'm going to help people too, just like you and Mama and Papa do." As Sarah returned to her duties, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that October evening when she had decided to stop and help a hungry child. She had gained more than just a new job. She had found a new purpose and a family that had welcomed her with open hearts. The elderly man she had invited in was now chatting happily with Giuseppe about the old days in their shared neighborhood. Other customers had noticed the interaction and were including him in their conversations, making sure he felt welcome and valued. It was exactly the kind of community atmosphere that the Romanos had dreamed of creating. Later that night, after the last customer had left and the restaurant was clean and quiet, the Romano family and Sarah sat together sharing a late dinner and planning for the future. They talked about expanding their outreach to homeless individuals, partnering with local shelters, and finding more ways to make their restaurant a beacon of hope in the community. You know what I think? Giuseppe said, raising his glass of wine in a toast. I think Michael was supposed to get lost that day, and Sarah was supposed to find him because it brought all of us together for something bigger than any of us could have accomplished alone. To second chances, Maria added, lifting her own glass. To paying attention to the people around us, Sarah contributed. To helping people, Michael chimed in, raising his glass of milk with all the solemnity of an adult making an important commitment. As they clinked glasses together, Sarah thought about all the seemingly small choices that had led to this moment. Her decision to turn back when she saw a hungry child. Giuseppe and Maria's choice to preserve their son's room in hope of his return. Michael's courage to trust a stranger who offered him kindness. The community's decision to embrace and support. A story of redemption and love. Each individual choice had seemed insignificant at the time, but together they had created something beautiful and lasting. Sarah realized that this was how the world changed for the better. Not through grand gestures or dramatic interventions, but through ordinary people choosing to care for each other, one small act of kindness at a time. Outside, the street where she had first encountered Michael was busy with evening foot traffic. Sarah wondered if there might be another lost soul out there who just needed someone to notice them, to see their humanity, to offer them hope. She made a mental note to pay attention tomorrow, and every day after that. The restaurant had become more than a business. It was proof that kindness could multiply, that one person's decision to care could ripple outward in ways they never imagined. Sarah had learned that heroes weren't people who performed impossible feats, but ordinary individuals who chose to act when they saw someone in need. As she helped Maria clear the last of the dinner dishes, Sarah smiled, thinking about how dramatically her life had changed. She had started that October evening as a bookstore employee simply trying to catch her bus home. Now she was part of a family mission to spread compassion throughout their community, one meal and one conversation at a time. Michael yawned and stretched, ready for bed after another full day of school and homework. Before heading upstairs, he hugged Sarah goodnight, just as he did every evening. "Thank you for finding me," he whispered, the same words he had spoken every night since coming home. "Thank you for letting me," Sarah whispered back, meaning it more each time she said it. As the Romano family headed upstairs to their apartment and Sarah prepared to walk to her own home just a few blocks away, she took one last look around the restaurant. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new stories, and new opportunities to make a difference in someone's life. She had learned that the most extraordinary moments often began with the simplest decisions. The choice to slow down, to pay attention, and to respond with an open heart when the world presented opportunities for kindness. The night she met Michael had taught her that every person walking past might be carrying a story of struggle, hope, or loss, and that sometimes all it took to change everything was one person willing to stop and care. Sarah stepped out into the cool evening air, grateful for the reminder that in a world that often felt harsh and disconnected, love and human compassion still had the power to create miracles. She walked home slowly, taking time to really see the people around her, ready to notice whoever might need help tomorrow.